Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have Elena Botelho join us today. Elena is a partner at GH Smart, and she recently wrote the book, The CEO Next Door, and she's here to tell us more. Elena, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
So I was born in a country that doesn't exist anymore. I come from Soviet Union back in the day. I grew up in a family of mathematicians and math and physics geeks. And I was always more intrigued by people, which brings us to our work today. When I came to this country, I had to send money back home. So I started in accounting and then went and got my MBA at Wharton. And then spent 5 years at McKinsey advising C-suite leaders on strategy, improving their bottom line. And what I realized at McKinsey is that really my best days at the firm were not kind of the most sophisticated spreadsheet or conjoint analysis or something, really sophisticated analysis, which we had plenty of, but really sitting down across from a leader and being helpful to them in some way, and in some way helping them see things in a different way that helps them be successful, which is when I got the call from GH Smart. And so for the last 12 years, I've been advising CEOs and boards, helping boards and investors select CEOs, helping groom and develop CEOs, and support them.
Tell us a little bit about GH Smart and what kind of organization that is.
So GH Smart has been around since 1995. We live on the intersection of psychology and human behavior and business value creation. Companies, leading companies, boards, and investors count on GH Smart to support them on the most important mission-critical people decisions. So whether it's picking the next CEO, whether it's actually helping that CEO build their leadership team to make sure that they deliver on the business strategy. Basically, anytime people and humans are critical and organizations are critical to value creation, GH Smart is the go-to partner.
Tell us about the CEO Next Door and why you decided to write this book.
For many, many years, leading firms have counted on GH Smart to support them in making a decision of who should run a business. And as we did this work, and I've had an opportunity to see up close and personal over 150 CEOs myself. Our firm has assessed or supported or coached or advised over 2,000 CEOs. And so when we looked at what these CEOs look like up close and personal, it just didn't match with the prevailing stereotypes out there. Kind of what most of us think of, and frankly what even the boards think of when they think of successful CEOs, versus what we saw behind the scenes when we did our analysis just didn't match. And so, coming from a family of mathematicians and, very analytical people, we just felt we need to put some data behind our anecdotal, empirical feeling. And so we went off and partnered with the University of Chicago and other top analysts to conduct the research for the book. And the purpose of the work was simple. It was to really uncover, to decode what is it that really makes a successful CEO for two reasons. One, because that's, having the right person at the top really drives a lot of value creation and affects livelihoods of a lot of people. And also, as importantly, because we often model ourselves against the role models that we do see on television or that we do see in the public domain. And CEOs are often, those role models. And so by helping bring facts and data to the understanding of what a successful CEO really looks like, I think we can really help anyone be a better leader and be more successful at work.
Tell us about some of the research that went behind actually writing this book.
Yeah, so we were very excited because of the unique nature of the work our firm does. We have front row seats to understand careers, lives, successes, and mistakes of over 17,000 leaders. And so for the first time, what we're able to do is really apply kind of Moneyball analytics to leadership. And we believe it's unique in three ways, what we've done. Number one, the quality and the depth of the data that we have by virtue of how we got the data. So we're not pulling it off publicly available bios or from search profiles. We're using the very same data that boards use to make a hiring decision. So it's a highly reliable, highly in-depth data to try to conduct this analysis. So that the depth of the data is really unique. Second, a lot of how we think about CEOs is shaped by those we see in the front pages of the newspapers all the time. And often it's Fortune 500 CEOs. But if you think about the millions of businesses in this country and in the world, 500 companies are hardly representative. And so what we've been able to do is we constructed a sample that really spans companies of all sizes, from Fortune 50 to a $50 million company to a 50-person company. and really cuts across different industries, because what we really wanted to find is kind of decode what are the patterns that really hold across company size, across industry. And then finally, thanks to modern state-of-the-art analytics, we were able to get the level of insight that before there wasn't the technology to do that. And so that's where we partnered with the University of Chicago, Professor Steve Kaplan, for over 12 years. We've worked with SAS Institute, we've worked with NYU and other leading data miners. And so we're able to take what we believe is the most kind of in-depth and broad representative data on leadership and combine that with 21st century analytics to hopefully bring a book that can help everybody in a very evidence-based way improve their careers.
Now, one thing you talk about in your book is how successful CEOs focus on the speed at which they make decisions rather than the precision around decision making. Tell us why this is important.
Yeah, that was one of it. So we had many surprises in doing the research for the book. We really didn't set out to kind of prove or disprove any hypotheses. It was very important for us to understand what the data really tells us. And one of the surprises is that, so first of all, we found that highly decisive CEOs are 15 times more likely to succeed. Well, that doesn't sound all that surprising, because obviously we want those at the top making good decisions, because they affect the whole company, the whole enterprise. But what did surprise us, we expected that it would be much more about the accuracy of decisions. We always think of, these individuals at the top as being endowed with better decision-making ability. They're just more accurate. They make better calls. And they do make a lot of good calls, but actually what made them stand out was the speed of their decision-making. So that was a big surprise for us. And then what we did is we dug further to understand how is it that they do it. CEO is a pace setter for the business. And so the pace of decision-making at the top is really critical, because it would be highly difficult, unusual, or even impossible for the rest of the business to outpace the CEO. So at the time when everything in business is about speed, if you look at annual reports of Fortune 500 companies, the word speed comes up a lot, or the words agility comes up a lot. Unless the CEO, the person at the top, can actually drive with speed and conviction around decision-making, it really creates a bottleneck. It's hard for the rest of the company to move quickly. So that's what makes it so important. So then we looked at highly decisive CEOs to understand, so what is it that allows them to move faster? Are they smarter than the next person? And actually what we found is they do two things really well. They make faster decisions and they make fewer decisions. So one of the ways of being decisive is actually deciding what not to decide on. One of the CEOs that we've gotten to know over the last few years is Madeline Bell. Madeline leads Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, not too far from here, which has got a 200-year history. It's one of the leading pediatric institutions in the world. And so when Madeline was a COO, there was a vehement debate about gel versus foam. So what should the hospital use around the operating rooms, on the floors? Should it be gel sanitizers or foam sanitizers? And we're in the flu season, so that's a very topical subject. But for hospitals, infections are a big challenge. And so the debate was really heated, and everybody had a strong position, and there were factions formed. And so finally it bubbled up to Madeline. And as a COO, she had to be the tiebreaker. And what she did instead is she said, you know what, that's actually not my decision to make. You guys escalated it up, but you should have actually pushed it down. Because the people that are most affected by this decision and people who have the most hands-on knowledge of what the right call would be aren't even us in the executive suite. Forget about me. They're actually people on the ground. And so she pushed it down, and that was her way of actually making a faster decision, which was pushing her team to decide, as opposed to taking that on herself, which would be tempting.
There was one term that you used in your book, which was around leading with impact.
Yes.
Tell us about what you mean by that and the importance around that.
Well, so obviously there are no leaders without followers, right? And that goes without saying. And especially, frankly, this day and age, you have to think about, even if you're running a small team or if you're running a large company, you have to think about not only leading your team, but you're only a tweet away from being exposed, from your leadership being exposed to the entire world, right? And so it's never been more important to be aware of the impact you have on others and to lead for impact. So what do we mean by that? What we mean by that, when we looked up close and personal at the CEOs, what we found is that the most effective CEOs lead much like an orchestra conductor. They show up And they're very aware of the audience. They're very aware of the set of stakeholders around them, whether it's the analysts or investors or their employees or the public. And yet the reason they make decisions and the ultimate purpose for which they act is not to please the stakeholders, but it's to advance the business forward so they can serve the stakeholders. One of the CEOs said it best, I think. So Tom Monahan is a former CEO of CEB, Corporate Executive Board. And Tom said, yeah, look, as a CEO, you have to keep all your stakeholders just at the right point of dissatisfaction so they can allow you to run the company, but do what's really in the best interest of the company. Because let's face it, if you were to do what the customers want you to do, you'd give away the product for free. If you were to do what your employees want you to do at the extreme, you'd be paying everyone gazillions of dollars. And your shareholders want to pay out dividends, right? And so ultimately, I thought it was really interesting how he positioned it, which is you have to do the right thing by your stakeholders, but to do that, you have to keep them constructively dissatisfied. And so that's what we call leading for impact.
You also have some methods and frameworks that you provide in your book around how this decision-making is actually done by leaders, whether it's decision-making quickly or if it's leading with impact. Can you just provide an example of one of those frameworks and methods?
Absolutely. We went behind the scenes to really decode the machinery that the best CEOs use. And so we offer a few frameworks, as you said, but I'll just give one example, which sounds very simple. So CEOs move fast by simplifying complexity. So, and what's beautiful about that is actually no matter whether they run a $2 million company or a $20 billion company, inevitably what a CEO does is they try to walk into the business and really understand what matters the most. What will move the needle? What will be most important for the ability to deliver for the customers and the bottom line of the business? Reid Foss, for anyone out there who wears glasses, so you've never heard of Reid Foss, but actually you've benefited from him. So Reid ran a couple of companies. He ran VisionWorks and National Vision, which is it's a retailer selling glasses. And Reid came into the business. He was valued at about $50 million, I believe. And what he was able to do, the business was really struggling. So what he did is he came in and he asked his team, so last time we did well, what did we do? And he worked with the team to identify 12 factors that made the biggest difference on performance. And for the rest of his tenure, he drove on those 12 factors relentlessly, whether it's 12 or 3. And then he was able to have a very successful exit. He built a $5 billion company that got sold to KKR and had a great happy ending. But the biggest thing in looking backwards that he would share is that he was able to simplify complexity and help focus the team on things that mattered the most. And that's something we can all do in our own life, whether you find yourself in the CEO role or if you're just thinking about your daily life, like literally starting your morning with asking yourself, what will make the biggest difference and how do I attend to those things first, can really help you advance.
You also talk about how successful CEOs have mastered the art of relationships and influence to get the job done. What does this entail?
Well, the first thing that surprised us is, when you think about CEOs who are really great at managing relationships, you often think of this charismatic extrovert that just, at the drop of the hat gets crowds to follow them. What we did is we looked behind the scenes at what really enabled CEOs to be effective at relationship management, and we found actually it's not inspired charisma as much as it's deliberate routines. And it's not so much about them being charismatic on stage, but it's actually much more about them understanding their audience. And what was really cool about that is that, we can affect whether we're introverts or extroverts. Things that we've uncovered from the CEOs, the practices and the routines they use, anybody can learn. And so we were really excited about that. To give you one example, actually, of something that's really simple that anybody can do, and you'd never think of that as a good kind of relationship or career hack, is we all think about mentorship as being really important. And we all think about, we need powerful mentors to help us advance in life, to help us give opportunities. When we looked at the CEO candidates, we actually found that the most successful candidates were not necessarily those who had powerful mentors themselves, although many did, but that's really a hard way to stand out. What set apart the most successful CEOs was that they were really good mentors to others very early in their career. And so if you think about building relationships and being an effective influencer as all about understanding others, there's no better way and no cheaper, more accessible, and a great way to do that than actually seeking out others to mentor as a way to build your CEO skills. So we thought that was surprising, because that's typically, traditional career advice is all about, you getting a mentor as opposed to you giving it to others. And then the other part that I would offer is back to this. It's not so much of inspired charisma, although that helps, as much as it is deliberate routines. We share lots of examples of routines that different CEOs use to communicate. One of them talks about anything I want to communicate, I say 7 times in 7 modalities, in 7 different ways. I may blog it, I may say it at a town hall, I may send it out in an email. But just realizing that relationships and followership is as much about the drumbeat of communication, and just being prepared to do it repeatedly and relentlessly.
So what are some common myths about what it takes to become a CEO?
Well, gosh, so we all imagine, if you say the word CEO, right, we all imagine this, charismatic, larger-than-life personality who makes brilliant decisions, often male, often 6 foot tall. There's lots of research about how important it is to be good-looking and male and tall. The problem with all of those things is that you can't really do anything to affect them. What made us really excited in the research is what we uncovered is actually behaviors that you can master is what really sets apart the successful CEO. So it's not so much what you were born with, it's really things that you've learned and practiced and applied throughout your career. And as we dug into the research, a lot of myths went out the door. So for example, you might imagine that these CEOs were all destined for greatness. We all know these friends we had who from kindergarten were the first person on the board and they were the leader of the class, and we assume these are the people who are voted the most likely to succeed, right? Well, when we look at CEOs who have been very successful, only 70% of them actually didn't know until much later in life that they wanted to even be a CEO. And so what's really interesting is, if you talk to your friends or if you talk to a common person out there, they'll say, well, CEO, it's just something that's completely irrelevant and accessible to me. The reality is you actually don't know, right? And so 70% of the CEOs you see on Squawk Box and in the media today, 70% of them didn't know until they got really within the strike zone of the opportunity that they even aspired to that. But what they did do is they applied these 4 behaviors that we talk about, and they've mastered them along the way. So that was just one example. Another example that's very common, and unfortunately still, what's dangerous about the stereotypes of CEOs is that they're not only kind of colloquial stereotypes, but they also affect who actually gets the roles, and they also affect what we believe we can aspire to. And so one of those stereotypes is how important it is to be an extroverted, charismatic leader, right? And the number of times in the most sophisticated boards, when we're discussing a CEO candidate and comparing and contrasting, inevitably somebody on the board will say, I'm just a little concerned because they seem really introverted. Well, the data shows it actually doesn't matter. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert actually doesn't significantly affect your probability of success. In fact, in our data set, introverts were slightly more likely to exceed expectations. So if we bucket CEOs into meets, doesn't meet expectations, and exceeds, in the exceeds buckets, there were even slightly more introverts. But the main message is, again, it's not about what you're born with or your innate makeup. It's about practicing the behaviors that are never too early, never too late to learn and master.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that kind of really answers the question of, are leaders born or are they made?
Exactly. When we look up close and personal at successful CEOs, we find that there are a lot of ways you can self-make. The other area is, I think often many of us are inclined to feel that we don't measure up in some way, that we don't quite have the pedigree. Well, we were shocked because we looked at, and we all know, obviously pedigree does help, right? If you went to a school with a great name, you got access to resources, and you do have great opportunities. But we actually found in our data set, only about 7% of CEOs got an Ivy League undergraduate education. On the other hand, 8% of CEOs didn't graduate from college, right? And so there's a way to advance, and there's an opportunity to advance, regardless of the pedigree.
So one of the other qualities that you talk about in your book that's so important is reliability. And one of the measures that you discuss is how reliable CEOs have a better chance of getting hired, or have had a better chance of getting hired than other CEOs because of this. So tell us more. What is reliability, and how is it measured, and what does it look like?
Well, so reliability, of the 4 behaviors, reliability was the one that surprised us the most. It surprised us because it's so simple, right? It sounds like such a basic thing that you'd almost, wouldn't think of reliability as the first quality of the CEO. Reliability also surprised us because when we ran the numbers and we did the research comparing and contrasting qualities that are associated statistically with CEO success and compared that with qualities that are statistically associated with likelihood of being hired, so factors that drive your success, factors that drive you getting the job, there was only 1 point of overlap, which is crazy, and that 1 point of overlap was reliability. So the other 4 behaviors help you be successful. Reliability doubles your chances also of getting hired. So reliability, highly reliable CEOs and those who can convey that reliability in the interview process double their chances of getting hired. And their chances of being successful actually increased 15 times. So it was very, very powerful. Another crazy thing about reliability is we actually created an assessment that anybody can take. We have it on our website, ceogenomebook.com. We had 11,000 people take the self-assessment on these 4 behaviors, and the behavior that came out the lowest is reliability. So we were shocked. It sounds very simple, and we were surprised that it popped up as so powerful. It matters, it doubles your chances of getting hired, it improves your odds of success by 15 times, and it's the weakest behavior of the public that's taken this, of 11,000 people. So clearly reliability is a big opportunity. So if I'm part of your audience thinking about, well, gosh, which of these behaviors should I work on? I think you can't go wrong with reliability.
How is that conveyed in an interview? How is reliability conveyed? Maybe you can share a case study with us.
When I think of a reliable CEO, my mind immediately goes to Bill Amelio. Bill is a son of an Italian shoemaker who came from a very, very simple background and went on to become a successful executive at IBM. He ran Lenovo, he ran CHC helicopters, and is now running Avnet, which is a multi-billion-dollar technology distributor. And so if you ask anybody about Bill, what does Bill stand for? You would hear 2 words about him: diabolical follow-through. And he will smile as he says it, and he'll talk about that about himself. So diabolical follow-through. And so Bill, from very early years, has demonstrated this unbelievable mindset of reliability. So when we think about reliability, there are 4 things when we look at reliable leaders. There are 4 things that they excel at. One is their mindset. It's the mindset of wanting to be counted on, not being willing to be relied on, but actually wanting to be counted on. And that you can see very, very early on. So Bill talks about, he was a wrestler in high school and college. And there were really tough fights, and he won some fights, he lost some fights, good preparation for being a CEO. And when I asked him, well, so what kept you going? You had it really tough when you were wrestling in college. He said, I couldn't let down my family. And so it was striking to me that his first thought wasn't about himself and his own victories, but it was about his family and them depending on him in some way. So that mindset of reliability really shows up very early on. Second, it's the habits. And the most powerful habit of reliability that you can convey in any interaction that is so simple that all of us will likely miss it is just being on time. It's one of those really simple things that anyone can practice today, but nothing speaks louder about your reliability and conveying that sense of reliability than being on time. And I have a client who says, if you're not early, you're late, right? So Bill is one of those rare CEOs who's mastered, both the mindset of reliability, the habits of reliability. He puts people around himself that build for reliable performance of the business, and then he institutes processes. Most CEOs don't necessarily master all 4, but a good way to start for anybody is simple daily habits that convey that you can be counted on.
So what kind of organizational cultures do reliable CEOs create?
So in our research to explore this notion of reliability, we wanted to push beyond our data and really go to extreme and think about organizations and teams where reliability is not a matter of business performance, it's actually a matter of life and death. And so we looked at, submarine officers, we interviewed Navy SEALs, we looked at hospitals, places where reliability means safety, means life, really survival, right? And so in the book, we talk about 4 characteristics of highly reliable organizations. So I'll share just one as an example, which is counterintuitive, is that highly reliable organizations make it safe to fail, they reward identification of mistakes, which makes no sense if you think about that, right? Because the highly reliable organization should be all about eradicating the mistakes. But the very first premise, whether you're in the Navy SEALs and your comrade, your colleagues, teammates' life depends on you, or if you're in a hospital and a mistake can cost somebody their life, is identifying mistakes early, catching mistakes early to prevent bigger mistakes from happening is really kind of the lifeblood of the culture of reliability. At CHOP, for example, we talked about Madeline. Madeline instituted a good catch program to really celebrate mistakes. And so what they do is she publishes a blog every day on, great catch. And so that people, rather than being terrified of mistakes, because we all want to do well in our job, especially when people's lives depend on us, she celebrates the fact that the mistake got caught early so that it wouldn't become a pattern, it wouldn't become a flaw in the system. And when you think about hospitals, right, that the reliability is really essential.
Tell us how successful CEOs view failure and how that impacts how they lead and the decisions that they make and reliability, as we've been speaking about.
Absolutely. Well, we found a fascinating piece of data in our research. We did some linguistic analysis of how CEOs and CEO candidates talked about their experience, and every one of them has had a setback. So of the 17,000 leaders we assessed, of the 2,000 CEOs, every single one of them has had both wins and losses in their career, right? And our process is really well suited to identify those. But what was different between those who succeeded and those who were less likely to succeed is how they talked about failure. Individuals who use the word failure to talk about, oh, I failed at blank, were actually half as likely to be successful CEOs as those who talked about mistakes in a very matter-of-fact way. And so seeing something as a failure and makes you more likely to want to avoid it, right? Makes it more likely for you to feel that this is something embarrassing or something shameful. And we've all been there. But what was fascinating is that we've seen CEOs who've had major, major blow-ups in their career. About 45% of the CEOs we've looked at had huge blow-ups. Doing an acquisition that cost the company $500 million. I mean, it's pretty safe to assume that anybody kind of listening to this conversation, if you've ever felt completely down and you've just made a really embarrassing mistake, I guarantee you there's a CEO out there who's been in the hotter water. There's a CEO out there who's probably made a dumber mistake either at your stage in their career and probably a costlier one as a CEO. And so what we found is what really differentiates successful leaders is how they look at those mistakes and ability to stare them in the eye and use them as learning opportunities as opposed to allow those to derail them and be ashamed of the failure, so to speak.
Another quality that you talk about around successful CEOs is the ability to adapt and the ability to let go of the past. Can you give us an example of what you mean by this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if of the 4 behaviors, the one that's getting the most attention in the boardrooms today is adaptability. We're living in a world that's changing at a faster rate than ever. I come from DC. Barnes & Noble just shut down maybe their last store in our area, whereas Amazon is opening theirs, which is very ironic. And so the change is everywhere, and ability to adapt is really essential for a leader. In our research, we found that CEOs who spiked on adaptability were 7 times more likely to be successful. So then we dug in to understand how is it that they adapted. And we assumed, I think what we often expect is that somebody who is highly adaptable must just see the future. We imagine, the Elon Musks of the world or the Jeff Bezoses who are ahead of their times. They have this uncanny vision for where the puck is going, if you will. What we found actually really shocked us, because what we found is CEOs who excelled in adaptability did something else. They let go of the past. They learned how to let go of the habits, businesses, business models, assumptions that served them incredibly well up until now. They were willing to let go of them and completely reposition. And I would also tell you that any failure to adapt typically is a failure of letting go of something that's worked really well, more so than the failure of seeing the future. One of my favorite stories on adaptability actually comes from outside of business. A few years back, NASA sent a probe to Mars. So that was before Elon Musk sent his red-hot Tesla to Mars. And so they send the probe, and obviously, American taxpayers spent a lot of millions of dollars to get it out there. The problem was that when it landed, the front wheels broke. And so now you have this multi-million-dollar thing sitting on Mars and it can't move and it can't complete the mission. Well, so a lot of people's careers are at stake. It's a big problem. And so what happened was obviously, first questions were whose fault is it? And, how could this happen, right? Once they got over that, the next question was, well, how do we fix the front wheels? Well, the problem is you can't fix the front wheels. You're in space. There's no way of actually fixing the front wheels until somebody asked the right question. They said, well, we're actually not trying to fix the front wheels or figure out whose fault it is. All we need to do is to get the damn thing moving. Once they reframed the problem and they were able to let go of their past assumptions of moving forward, what they did is they actually instead got the back wheels working and they dragged the thing on Mars backwards. And in the process of doing that, they were able to actually collect a lot more samples that they wouldn't have otherwise because of the way that the vehicle was moving. And so that's when they discovered, I think, remnants of water on Mars. They discovered some salt deposits or something like that. But it was just, I think it was such a fantastic example of adaptability. And often, like in that situation, a crisis is what forces us to adapt.
Tell us about the career catapults that successful CEOs go through before they actually become CEO.
Absolutely. Well, so we set out to understand what makes a successful CEO. Part of it is the behaviors we talked about it, but part of it is the career choices they make. And so we try to look for what helps you get there faster, right? And we all know, gosh, having an MBA from a prestigious school really helps. Working for a prestigious consulting firm really gets you to the top. So we all colloquially know of some catapults, and a lot of them, some of them may be very accessible, but a lot of them are really hard to access. So we dug through the data and we analyzed, on average, it takes about 24 years to get to the CEO role. So what we did is we focused our analysis at the CEOs who made it there faster than average. And so we did actually find that about a quarter of them, in fact, had MBAs from elite programs. 97% of them undertook one of these three catapults that we discovered. So we were actually really surprised. So we expected MBA to be the key driver. Only a quarter of them had elite MBAs. 97% of them undertook the catapult, and about half of them undertook two of those catapults. So we uncovered three catapults that help you get to the top faster. The one that I would offer occurred 60% of the time, which is somebody taking a sidestep or go small to go big. Taking an opportunity that didn't look like it was a sure path to the top. It's taking a division that nobody else wanted to run. It's going off to start some small thing without the coveted P&L responsibility. And so what we found when we looked at who advanced faster is not the story of this carefully crafted, very safe path, but we actually saw them taking very strong risks on their career and then excelling and delivering. And so one of the ways they did that, 60% of the sprinters, as we call them, did that was by taking on something smaller to build the skills, get the proof points to go bigger later.
What are some things that CEOs do to be seen and become known?
That's a great question. I mean, it's a crowded world out there, right? And when we look at who gets to the top, it's really a combination of getting great results and also getting noticed for those results. One of the things we noticed about folks that get noticed and get to the top really was counterintuitive to us, which is they rock the boat. So they don't shy away from conflict. They take on people, personalities, issues for the sake of moving the business forward. One example was, very surprising. We'll call this woman Carly. So Carly looked like she was on her way out as opposed to up. Carly came in early in her career to a networking company, network engineering company. And she was, deep in the organization in the entry-level job, and she felt that, based on what she learned, that the company network wasn't secure, and that was really important. And so she was a very junior person. She tried to get the message across. Her boss wouldn't listen to her. Her boss's boss certainly wouldn't listen to her. And so what she did is she hacked the system. She literally went and she hacked the company's IT system. Not something I would necessarily recommend you try at home, but it's just, and so what happened was she got fired first, except then she got rehired in a much more senior role and got a lot of visibility at the company, because you could imagine the stories and the urban legends that were, Carly became very, very famous. So there was no question, became very easy for her to stand out. Now, that's a huge career risk. The only reason it worked, by the way, is that her genuine ambition was for the business. She didn't do this to advance her own goals. In fact, she assumed that she was going to have to, she was off looking for another job. And so this is probably an extreme example, but when we look at successful careers, particularly those folks who do make it to the CEO suite, this willingness to rock the boat, to put the business in a better position, is something that we see quite often. So if you're tempted to play it safe to get to the top, that could be a risky strategy. Playing safe to get to the top is a risky strategy.
Okay, so you've applied for the job as CEO, you've made that final list. What are some things that you recommend that people do to actually help them?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're excited because those learnings apply whether you're interviewing for CEO job or for any job out there. Well, so normally when you're in the final rounds, you're probably, I imagine if you're like most people, your main preoccupation is how do I show to them what I can do? How do I show to them that I'm qualified for the job? Which is a very natural focus at that stage in the game. And it's exactly the wrong thing to do. Because the reality is if you're in the final rounds, they already have an inkling that you're likely already qualified. And now it's just all about kind of what's going to make you stand out among the very, very short list of people. And it's the tendency, the temptation to focus on how you convey your skills and your qualifications is the wrong temptation. Instead, what successful candidates do is they actually focus on the decision makers. They focus on those that are interviewing them and trying to understand what would make them feel safe putting this company, this job, this team in your hands. So we worked with SAS and with the University of Chicago to look at who gets hired. And fundamentally boils down to two things. Likable and reliable people are more likely to get hired, right? And the reason likable and reliable people are more likely to be hired is that they make us feel safe, right? If you're in a position of a decision maker, actually your main preoccupation is for you not to be embarrassed. And so people that are likable, people that put you at ease, create this warmth around themselves, and people who are reliable and can deliver are people who ultimately get hired. And so your first preoccupation shouldn't be so much about how do I demonstrate that I'm the person for the job. It's really trying to understand what would make the decision maker feel safe giving you that opportunity. On the flip side, I can also share one thing that you might be tempted to do that would be a bad strategy in an interview. From our analysis of linguistic patterns in the data and who gets hired and who doesn't, the dumbest thing you can do is actually trying to sound smart in an interview. And it sounds completely counterintuitive because we all want to put our best foot forward. When we looked at linguistic patterns of successful candidates and compared it to those who didn't get the job, folks who didn't get the job spoke in a highfalutin, pseudo-intellectual language with lots of complex SAT words, unless you're being interviewed for a job that requires that vocabulary. Folks that spoke colloquially, with stories, with memorable and relevant facts, but in a very accessible fashion, we're 8 times more likely to get the opportunity. So speaking smartly may be a very dumb interview strategy.
So you're in the CEO role now. What are some typical mistakes that CEOs make that they might not think about otherwise?
So often when we get called by CEOs, it's because they want help with their board. Because the first thing that they worry about coming into the role is this new big scary thing. Whether you're a CEO, it's your board. If you're coming into a new role anywhere in the organization, you probably want to know how to succeed with your boss. Well, the crazy thing is then it's the wrong thing to worry about. When we analyze the data about actual mistakes CEOs made, 75% of the mistakes were all about people and were all about building their team. So we were surprised because the one thing that they all know how to do coming into the role should be building the team. That's the one thing they've done their entire career. So then we pushed ourselves further. We actually thought, okay, well, let's look at how CEOs get fired, right? Because we want to know how to succeed, but we need to protect the CEOs from failure. We looked at 70 examples of CEOs getting fired, and again, people mistakes turn out to be the root cause of about 50% of those. And so why is that? How could that be possible? That the one thing that they do their entire career is the one thing that gets them in trouble. And so in the book, we talk about 5 safe people bets that get you in trouble as any kind of leader. You don't need to be CEO. And how to mitigate those. And so I'll offer kind of one mindset shift maybe that could be really helpful. And it sounds simple in theory, but hard to do in practice. Most of us, when we decide on who's on our team, especially when we're in a role that's so important, where we feel like we've worked our whole career to this moment, right? We tend to look at the past and we tend to kind of think about people in light of their past performance. What the best CEOs do is they actually first ask themselves the question of, if I had no team, if I had to start from scratch, and the only thing that mattered is what I'm expected to do in the future, or where I want to take this business, or where I want to take this marketing team, or wherever you happen to be. If the only thing that mattered is the future, because let's face it, you're evaluated on the future, right? The reason you got this role is for your future performance, not what you did in the past is only kind of a reason to get there, right? And then they ask themselves, okay, so if I had no team, who would I hire into these roles against what I want in the future? So you want to drive with your team, you want to drive looking in the windshield, right, of the future versus the rear view mirror. And then you look at the past performance as data to inform who can and cannot perform for the future, but not as the reason to kind of hold on to necessarily to the existing people and the existing roles. So I think leaders who can make that shift, which again, conceptually sounds very simple, it's very, very hard to do. Because as a leader, you want to do right by your team, and you want to be loyal, you want to inspire loyalty. But the best leaders build their teams for the future, as opposed to let themselves be handcuffed to the past.
It's a very interesting insight, Elena. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I hope it's helpful.
It is. Thank you. And we'll see you next time on Sarder TV.